If you like this video, please consider supporting the Oto Kano channel over on Patreon. Thank you. Hello there, how are you, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to take a look at Paul Rubens' brush set that they've kindly sent me. As always, they did send me this set for free. However, I have not been paid to create this video, so all opinions I express in this video are of my own and isn't influenced by the fact that they've sent me a set to try out. As you can see, Paul Rubens 4 brush set comes in this really durable, solid presentation case. As with the paint sets that we've seen so far on this channel, their presentation is really top notch. The box opens like this with a magnetic lid that just closes the box nicely. And this is what the brushes look like. As I said, you get 4 brushes in this set. You get 2 what they call weasel brushes and 2 squirrel brushes. So unfortunately for vegetarians and vegans out there, this set it won't be appropriate. You get a size 1 and a size 6 of the weasel round brushes, and then you get a size 10 and what they call size 4 of the squirrel brushes. Now this brush is a quill brush, and quill brushes work on a completely different sizing scale, and that's why the size 10 of the squirrel brush is a lot smaller than the size 4 brushes. You can buy these brushes on Amazon, both on the UK site and the American site, and they are about £45 for the set in the UK and $55 in the American website. You're also able to buy one or the other of the squirrel brushes on its own as well if you're just interested in the squirrel ones. You can also find the squirrel brushes individually being sold on AliExpress. However, I haven't yet found this 4 brush set over on AliExpress. Let's get these brushes out and give them a soak and see how they perform on paper. As you can see, all 4 brushes make a very lovely fine point. Let's see how they perform on watercolor paper. First up, we are going to test out the Paul Rubens #1 brush. It's a very fine brush. I'm going to test out a few characteristics such as how fine the line is going to be, how much water does it hold, how well does it do details, and also how well it does washes. This is size 1. I have to say, for a tiny little size 1 brush, this is an enormous amount of water. In terms of fine lines though, it's quite hard to have a good control of getting very thin line because the brush is so soft. It's very difficult to get fine lines. Let's try drawing filling squares. I tend to find that with brushes that hold a lot of water, trying to get the details in neatly is quite hard. But for a natural brush, this is nice. I think this brush is better at producing consistent width when you're not trying to produce the finest of lines that this brush can create. A little bit thicker creates a much more consistent brush strokes. When you use the whole length of the brush to just drag along, it does a really good job because it holds so much water. Not many brushes can produce this amount of consistency by using the whole length of the brush at a size 1 size brush. So that is really impressive in terms of how much water it holds. Let's see how well it takes to varying the width of the line. I would say that this brush handles changing in line width really well because it holds so much water. There's none of the skipping that you see in some brushes. However, it is quite difficult to get the finest of lines out of this brush. So I would definitely say that this brush is a great little brush that holds a lot of water, but maybe not the most suitable for the very, very fine detail and very fine lines that you kind of come to expect from a size 1 brush. Let's see how well it does gradated washes. I messed this one up, so let's take this as the sample, and it does a fantastic job of creating gradated washes because again it holds so much water. And surprisingly, for a size 1 brush, because you think size 1 brush is not suitable for doing large washes, push comes to shove, it has a really easy job of creating a large area of wash like this, just because it holds so much water. Even though this brush is classified as size 1, I would take it more as a bigger size brush because it's not very good at doing the very fine lines, but it is awesome at doing all the things you expect from a bigger brush. I would think more of this as a good size, maybe 6 brush in terms of the amount of water you get and the use that it's best suited for. Now let's try the size 6 brush. And this is made with Weasel again, the same as the size 1 brush we just tried. I'm expecting great things from this brush. It's holding a ton of water. I can just see it in the brush. But it just keeps going and going and going. I think that's about it. But that is a huge amount of color in one little size 6 brush. As you can see, there's not much bounce to this brush. It's a very soft brush, and unlike the synthetics, it struggles to bounce back. So that is one thing to consider. If you like a brush with a lot of spring, then this won't be suitable. But if you are looking for a nice soft brush that keeps its shape to whatever shape you put it in, this is a fantastic brush. Let's try to get very fine lines. This brush does best at fine lines when you don't have as much water in the brush. We get some very nice fine lines. I would say that this brush is better at producing fine lines than the size 1 is. Size 1, the tip is pretty rounded, whereas you can get some nice thin lines with the size 6. So that makes this brush very versatile. Let's see how it does with painting in squared areas. This is very good. And again, because it holds so much color, you're just going to be able to keep going on and on without having to re-dip your brush in the paint again. As I said before, if you want to do fine lines with this brush, then do soak your brush in the color, but do give it a dab on the tissue paper or cloth before you take your brush to the paper, and you will get much better control. If you just go in with your brush wet like this, you're going to struggle to create really fine lines. Whereas if you just dab it onto a paper first, you get really nice fine lines like this. Let's try the side of the brush. And not surprisingly, it does a great job at creating very consistent colors. Let's see how far we can take this. That's extraordinary how much water that brush holds. And I already know this, but it's going to be really good at creating washes. So I would say that this size 6 brush is an excellent all-rounder. It does great at fine lines, great at doing filling, and also amazing at doing the big washes, and it keeps going on and on. Great versatile brush. As long as you pay attention to how much water is in the brush, you get huge variety of lengths as well. The only thing I would say with this brush is because it holds so much water, if you try to start drawing or painting with the paint fully loaded, you will get lots of big puddles. You're better off dabbing that water off on the tissue before creating any pattern so that you don't get this big pools of water at the end. Now let's try the size 10 brush. This is a squirrel brush. It will be interesting to see how having the squirrel instead of weasel makes a difference in the brush. I haven't actually had much experience with natural hair brushes, and this is the first time I'm comparing weasel versus squirrel, so it will be very interesting. Okay, I'm going to stop there. As you can see, it holds an enormous amount of water. I would say that from here onwards, it's become more of a dry brushing technique, which is great because if you are into dry brushing and you want to do a large area of dry brushing without having to go back to the water, then this is a great brush because it just releases the water very, very slowly once it gets to the dry brushing stage. I just want to show you how soft this brush is. It will stay in this shape for as long as you leave it, which is pretty impressive. The one thing I am noticing though is that this line is considerably darker than the following lines. So I'm predicting that it's going to have some puddling problem when we come to do the more detailed lines. So let's try doing very fine lines. And I'm going to first do the line without dabbing on the tissue, which for a size 10 brush, it's medium fine. However, let's dab this on a tissue paper first and then see how well it does it. So again, you're going to have a much easier time producing very fine lines if you just dab your brush on the tissue first. I could just keep going till the end of the page and I won't run out of colour. Now let's try doing squares, dabbing on the tissue again. I would say that for a size 10 brush, this comes to a very nice point, which makes filling in squares very easy. Now let's try doing wiggly lines, and as before with all the other brushes, if you just go straight from the palette or the paint to the paper, you're only gonna get thick lines like this, whereas if you just take some of that water out, then you'll get a much thinner line. The brush is very, very sensitive to pressure though. So you get variations in thickness very quickly because the hairs in this brush is so soft. So you might struggle to produce consistently thin, curved lines like this just because it's so sensitive. Let's try using the whole length of brush and see how far it will go. That's pretty far. I wonder if I can carry on. Yep. That's pretty extraordinary how much water this holds. Let's do gradated washes. One thing I am noticing with this brush in particular is that even if you shake a lot of your paint out in the water, there's paint still gathered at the bottom of the brush down here, which means you see how I went lighter here, but as I started pressing harder, I got darker colors again here because of that paint just sitting there, having not rinsed out properly. So if you are doing gradation, I highly recommend that you really rinse out your brush in the water first, so you don't get this dark surprise. And even after I rinsed it out quite well, like way more than I normally would, I'm still getting this dark effect. So I would say it's not the best, most suitable brush for doing these gradated washes with. Let's see how big an area a wash this can create. As you can see, you can do quite a big area for a size 10 brush with this brush. So great for doing washes with, but again, not great at doing the gradated washes with. And finally, we are going to test out the size for Squirrel Brush. And I can already see this is going to hold a lot of water. Let's see how long. Well, we're at the bottom of the page and we haven't even got into dry brushing yet. I haven't re-dipped this in the paintbrush. It's still the same load of paint. I'm at the end of the second page and I've just very slightly started noticing the dry brushing effect rather than wet paint. As you can see, it holds an enormous amount of water, and also this brush is very soft as well. I started this experiment with a fully loaded wet brush, and as you can see, these first few lines are a lot darker than the rest, which means it just dumps a lot of that color at the beginning if you use it fully loaded. Whereas if you look at the rest of the sheet and on the second sheet, it's actually pretty consistent, which means once you just dab that excess water off, you're going to have a really good time painting with this brush because you're going to get consistent offloading of water onto the paper. Let's see how it performs with fine lines. I am going to dab this on a tissue first, and actually it comes to a very fine point, surprisingly so for such a big brush. However, because we're talking about like 1 or 2 hairs that come to a very fine point, if you don't look after your brush properly and dry it in a perfect point shape, that point is going to get bent very quickly. So I would recommend, as I would with all natural brushes, to pay extra attention in your aftercare of these brushes, especially in how you dry them, so that you don't get a bent point at the end. It creates incredibly thin lines. I am very impressed. Now let's try squares, and I've dabbed this off a tissue first again. I would say that it's unfair to use a quill brush to do detail works like this because you're not going to have as good a water control with this at in a smaller space. So if you try to paint small areas with this brush, you're going to get lots of puddling that you then have to take care of later. Now let's try detailed lines. Similar to the previous brush, this brush is very sensitive. However, I am having a much easier time at getting smooth thin lines with this brush than I did with the size 10 brush. And you can get either this or the size 10 brush on its own, and if you are looking to get one or the other, I would actually recommend this brush because you do get much easier time doing finer controlled lines than the size 10 brushes. Now let's draw using the full width of the brush and see how long it will go on for. So the answer is ridiculously long distance. As you can see right here, it does dump a lot of water. I started this with a fully loaded brush, so I would recommend for better water control to dab it off a tissue first, but this is an extraordinary length of color from one load of brush. Now let's try gradated washes, and I have a feeling this is going to suffer from the same issue that the other size 10 squirrel brushes did, in that it's going to trap a lot of paint in the base of the brush. Actually, surprisingly, it certainly doesn't struggle with it as much as the size 10 brush did. I'm able to wash out more paint out of the base of this brush than the size 10. Let's see how large a surface we can cover with this one load of water. That's a huge area to cover with just one brush load. One of the concerns with cheaper brushes, especially like natural hair brush that is quite affordable like these brushes are, is how much hair loss you're going to experience. And I started this video with brand new, still got the glue thing in the brushes, and I experienced 2 hairs come out of this brush. And with quill brushes you are going to experience some hair loss anyway, just because of the way it's made. And as for the rest of the brushes, I've experienced no hair loss, which is amazing for an affordable natural brush. So that is the Paul Rubens 4 brush set. In summary, they are great brushes that hold a ton of water. So if you do like big washes and you love the natural hair brushes, I think this is a great affordable set to have. Each brush has its own unique characteristics, and the only one I wouldn't recommend is definitely the size 10 Squirrel one. That struggled a lot more compared to how well the other 3 performed. So if you are considering just buying one or the other of the Squirrel brushes, as I keep saying, do go for the size 4 quill brush rather than the round brush. The little brushes are amazing, and they have good fine control for a natural soft brush, so I am very impressed with that. The 3 good brushes all come to a nice thin point, which is lovely. So would I recommend this brush set? I think even with the size 10 not being great, at £45 for natural hair brushes that are good quality, this is a great value for money. Of course, with all natural brushes, you do have to take extra care in the aftercare of these brushes for the points to maintain its shape. Natural brushes are very well known for losing its shape quickly compared to the synthetic brushes. But if you take good care of natural hair brushes, they will last you a long time and you're going to have such fun painting with them. Big thank you again to Paul Rubens for sending me these gorgeous brushes. I will definitely enjoy using them in my own painting. I will leave links down below for the Amazon UK and Amazon.com website, as well as the AliExpress site where you can get these brushes. If you have any questions, do let me know in the comments below, and let me know how you think these brushes performed compared to other natural hair brushes that you've had experience with, as I have limited experience of natural hair brushes myself. I hope you enjoyed this review. If it was useful to you, then please do give it a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!